guys, welcome back. Mrs. York here again. Happy Thursday. Hope you guys had a great day yesterday with your activities. Before we get into our next lesson, I just wanted to remind you very quickly that tomorrow your project is due. Don't forget, okay? We're really excited to see them. We know how hard you guys have been working on them. And so we're really excited to see what that finished product is that you have for us. Remember, you're going to send us a video, 3 minutes or less, or you're going to upload pictures for us to see, so that way we can see what it is that you guys have been working on. All right, so remember, tomorrow your project is due. Okay, so today we're going to get into our next lesson, and our next lesson is section 36, the feeding of the 5,000. So if you guys could open up your books right now to page 82, we're going to get into that lesson. While you're opening your book, there's been a theme every week. Last week was candles. This week, Mr. O'Brien and Mr. Moran talked about their coffee mugs. So I brought my coffee mug into our lesson today. This is a beautiful Shutterfly coffee mug that Anthony had made for me a couple years ago. Happy Mother's Day. Reminder, everyone, Mother's Day is not this weekend. It's next weekend. So you got to go get Mom a gift. Got to go find her something, okay? Oh, yes. Anthony, do you want to show them? Come on in. No? Okay. Anthony wanted me to show you that we've changed who is joining us today for our lesson. Java's Palace is no longer here. We now have Forky. So maybe we'll play this every week. Who's in Mrs. York's lesson? What toy joins us today? So today, it's Forky. Okay? He's not trash. All right. So your books should be open. Let's get started. All right, so today we're going to be reading from the Gospel of John. And before we get into that, this story, the multiplication of the loaves, super important. Why do I say that? Well, it is, but it is in all four of the Gospels. Okay, so we know that because it's in all four of them, there is this very important reason that it's there. So let's get into it. So we look at it, and it says that as Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee, a large crowd had followed him because they saw what he had been doing. Jesus goes up the mountain, and he sits with his disciples. So when he sits down, he notices in verse 5 that he saw a large crowd was coming towards him. And he says to Philip, he says, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He knows the answer. He's kind of doing this in a way to see what Philip says, and also to show what he's about to do. This story kind of shows us two ways that we can react to human need. One is kind of the human disciple way, meaning these disciples, and the other is the Jesus, kind of what we want to be way. So Philip says, Jesus, 200 days wages aren't going to be enough to feed this many people. That's how many people there were. And we know from the title that there are I don't know why this keeps popping up. There we go. There are 5,000 people, okay? So there are a lot of people there, and no way are they saying that they would have enough money to buy all these people food. So then, in verse 8, Andrew says to Jesus, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are those going to do us?" He's like, there's 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. There are 5,000 people. How is that going to even make a difference? So Jesus then says, "Have the people recline." Now that's an important statement. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. So verse 10, important statement. We're going to come back to it. All right. So Jesus says, "Have the people recline." And they do. And then if we go into verse 11, Jesus took the loaves, he gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. So he takes the bread. Notice what he does. He breaks it, he gives thanks, and distributes it. Kind of sounds familiar. We're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. So when they had their fill, he said to the disciples, "Gather the fragments left over so that nothing was wasted." So they collected them, and they wind up filling 12 wicker baskets full from the 5 barley loaves and the fish. Now, at this point, when the people see what he has done, they are amazed by this. And they start to more so believe that he is the prophet that they have been told that he is, that has been spread that he is, and that he's trying to tell them who he is. And it's in this breaking of the bread and this feeding of the 5,000 people that he does this. Okay, So we know the story. We know how he multiplies the fishes and the loaves. Let's break it down and really get into some of the important scriptural themes here that we should be looking at. So first of all, we see that there are 5 loaves and 2 fish. St. Bede tells us, he has this theory about these 5 loaves and these 2 fish, and it's right here in this center of the page here. He says that the 5 loaves represent the 5 books of the Torah, and that the 2 fish represent the prophets and the Psalms, and that the young boy that has this food represents the Jewish people. And as it says here in the bottom of that box, it says when Jesus receives the Old Testament scriptures from the Jews as this bread and fish, he breaks open their deeper spiritual meanings to refresh the multitudes, to bring them that food to eat. So there's a really interesting Old Testament theme going on here with these loaves and these fish. Also, let's talk a little bit about Jesus and being able to feed all of these people. We have a lot of feeding here. We have a lot of themes here. We have a lot of ideas here. Where was Jesus born? In a manger. Well, he wasn't born in a manger. He's born in the stable. He's born in the cave, whatever it was we said. But he's placed in the manger. What did we say a manger was? A manger is a feeding trough for animals, a place that animals feed out of. Remember, we said that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, which means house of bread, and he's placed in this feeding trough, a place of food for animals. He, we know, is the bread of life. Well, here, even more so, and in concrete food, he provides this bread for the people. He is the bread of life, and he's really starting to show us how he's the bread of life and who he is and what his mission is, okay? This story here in John's Gospel is going to begin the bread of life discourse, and Brother Pat is going to talk about that tomorrow in our lesson. But the bread of life discourse leads us to that penultimate moment at the Last Supper, where the Eucharist is instituted, where that Eucharistic miracle begins, where Jesus gives us himself. And it all ties back to this first moment here where he feeds these 5,000 people. He's able to take this miracle and feed all of these people. And isn't that what he does in the Eucharist? It's not just on Holy Thursday that he does it. Yes, that's where it begins, but that's not the only place. Every time we go to church, every time the Eucharist is celebrated, we are reliving this idea of Jesus as the bread of life, multiplying himself for all of us, for everyone. So this story here prefigures all of that. It sets it into motion. It sets the storyline of the bread of life as Jesus, or Jesus as the bread of life, I should say, into motion. Like I said, tomorrow's lesson will be on the bread of life discourse, so we'll talk about that more tomorrow with Brother Pat. But this is where it begins, okay? Another note of mention is that Mark's gospel talks about the feeding of the 5,000, but then he also talks about a feeding of another group of 4,000 Gentiles. Interesting that Mark's gospel here talks a little bit about that. And it's showing that Jesus didn't just come for the Jewish people, but he came for all people. And he's willing to even feed these other people, these Gentile people. All right? So this is a great story that isn't just like, hey, yeah, it's an awesome miracle that Jesus performs. He's able to feed 5,000 people. And I think that's what a lot of us have always learned. I know as a kid, and I'm sure you guys knew if I asked you before this lesson, hey, what does Jesus do? Oh, he takes 5 loaves and 2 fish and he's able to multiply them. Great. That's awesome. That's Jesus. He is a miracle worker. There's no doubt. But it's even a deeper rooted meaning. And that deeper rooted meaning is the fact that he is showing us before the moment. All of these stories are leading us up to Jesus being crucified and becoming our Savior. And this moment here is pointing us towards that Last Supper and Jesus being our bread of life and being in the Eucharist and giving us himself in the Eucharist. Now, our next story on page 83 is the walking on water. Okay, and this ties into the story of the feeding of the 5,000, and you may be like, why? Well, okay, so first of all, we go from verse 15 to verse 16, so it seems chronologically it happens right away, but we're going to tie it back to a psalm. So with the walking on the water, the disciples are out in the Sea of Galilee and a storm comes up. Similar to what Mr. O'Brien was talking about on Monday with the storms, how they just come up. Here's another one, and it just comes up, and the disciples are in the boat. And all of a sudden, in the boat, they see coming towards them Jesus walking on the water. This picture here on page 83 is an awesome one to show. They see Jesus walking on the water towards them. And when he comes towards them, he says to them, do not be afraid. If that's not the message that Jesus gives us at all times, he's here. Don't be afraid. I got this, Jesus is saying. And he says, Anthony's asking me if he can have some chips while I'm doing this lesson. So that was my nod there. Anybody else want a snack? So Jesus is walking towards them and he says, do not be afraid. Okay? And when he says this to them, they assume Jesus is going to board the boat and that he's going to save them. But rather, all of a sudden, they open their eyes and they're at the shore. Because that's what Jesus does. He brings us to that safety. That's who he is. He is always there for us in that. With that, let's tie it back to the feeding of the 5,000. And I told you, remember, rewind a little bit. I told you about how he told them to recline. So that comment there about reclining and this calming of the water, they tie us back to a very important psalm. And if you click this, the plot thickens on page 82, read along. The crowd was asked to recline by Jesus, meaning to lie down, relax, take a chill, relax. And the story fulfills Psalm 23. And here's what Psalm 23 says. The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I lack. In green pastures, he makes me lie down. That's here at the feeding of the 5,000. He made them lie down. He had them relax. He was their shepherd that led them to his flock, led them to their food. That was him right here. And then it says, to still waters he leads me. And we see that in the next story where he calms the sea. Well, he doesn't calm the sea. He takes them and calms them and brings them back to the sea, to the shoreline. And here we have that he has fulfilled both of these moments in Psalm 23, pulling again that Old Testament into the new right here, tying them together. Remember, we always say you can't read the New Testament without reading the Old. It's not going to make sense. I mean, it'll be a story and we'll get it, but you're not going to see this beautiful imagery that God has put in there for us and Jesus has created and tied in and brought all of this together. All right, guys. So that's pretty much where we're going to leave off for today. So again, just remember this Bread of Life discourse, this whole story, this leading up to the Eucharist is starting, and this was our first story into it. Like I said, Brother Pat will take over that tomorrow. So I hope you guys have a really good rest of your day. Remember your projects due tomorrow. Don't forget. We're really excited to see them. We know how hard you guys have been working on them. Alrighty? I'll see you guys probably next Thursday. I think that's my day. So I'll see you then. Bye, guys.